last minute choice.
So our last panel today is on
We're doing this on the
fundraising.
26th of June next year.
And I'm excited to introduce to you the moderator of the panel, Deon Thomas. Deon is the all-time leading scorer for Illinois basketball.
ILL!
I am not. Well, at least I don't see any orange on him today, so that's a good sign. But he is being inducted into the Illinois Athletic Hall of Fame, and he's also a two-time European basketball championship with Maccabi Tel Aviv from Israel. So I'm going to turn it over to Deon to introduce the rest of the panel.
I'm going to take this out of here, and first I want to thank Roy for having me and allowing me to come up here and share the little bit I know about fundraising with a lot of people that know a lot about fundraising, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some pointers that will help you, that you can take along with you. But we're going to do this really relaxed, so will everyone please come up and grab the seats. Then we'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll get into this. We're gonna we'll go from closest to me down to the further end. And Roy was nice enough to mention my Hall of Fame induction. So we're gonna start off and we're gonna introduce Mr. Trent Jackson. Trent Jackson is the Senior Director of Development for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Who is also a recent Hall of Fame inductee for the University of Wisconsin. Yeah. Then we have Michelle Stroud. Michelle is the Director of Development for Dare to Try here in Chicago. Then we have Jenny, and if I pronounce this wrong, please forgive me. Jenny Donley Convey. All right, thank you. She's the associate consultant, senior associate consultant for Giving Tree, also located here in Chicago. Then we have Mr. Ryan Jones, who's the senior director of development for the Evans Scholars Foundation. And then at the end, we have Philip Leopold, who's sports writer, sports and faith at the service of humanity for the Vatican. So can we please give a round of applause for our panelists? And, you know, I know it's coming late. We've been here, or you guys have been here all day. I had to come from the office, so I've been working somewhere else. But we're gonna try to make this as informative and as, I won't say quick, but as concise as we can get it, so you can offer up questions to the panelists, because this is who we're here to learn from. And I say we, because as Roy mentioned, or didn't mention, I have just become recently the Associate Director of Development for the University of Illinois. So I'm here learning just as much from these guys as many of you are. So we're gonna get right into it. And one of the first things I as a coach and as a player, and I heard it mentioned earlier, was the why. Why did you guys get into this form of work? I'll start right here.
Is this thing on? The why, that is a very important question. I think for me, it all started when I was a student athlete and coming from Chicago to Wisconsin and being the recipient of the Ab Nicholas Family Basketball Scholarship. That was fascinating to me, that someone would give up their resources to provide an opportunity for someone else to get an education. So I was always fascinated by that. And growing up in Chicago and in Bolingbrook as part of a Boys and Girls Club, I was always fascinated by people that would give up their resources to help provide a better opportunity for me. So I've always said in my life when I was growing up that if I ever had the opportunity, I would love to be the person that is giving back to help others. And if not in a position to do that, I'd love to be the person in a position helping to facilitate that.
Michelle?
So I grew up in a
family of social and civil activists, and so spent most of our Thanksgivings and Christmases distributing meals to the homeless, or boycotting. I didn't know what grapes were until I was about 12 or 15 because of my parents felt strongly about supporting the migrant workers in North Carolina where we lived at the time. And so I grew up with this sense of service and responsibility to my community. But it wasn't until I ended out of college, I ended up in a career in advertising and marketing, and had always done sort of service work outside of that. It wasn't until a little bit later that I realized that supporting organizations also had a financial component. And so as I continued developing in my professional career and doing volunteer work, I realized that there was a place where I could put those things together and use those marketing skills and use those creative and communication skills for public good. And so I shifted my career not too long ago. I left advertising in 2011 and started consulting, and then made it a fully, my husband and I lived overseas for a long time and made it a full-time career when we moved back to the US, and so became a fundraiser. That seemed like a really nice way to take all that service work that I had done and all that communications work I had done and put it together in a place where I could do something for other people.
So there are a lot of things that brought me probably to the nonprofit world. In the interest of time, I'll highlight one of them. So in addition to being a nonprofit consultant here in Chicago, I'm also a grant maker. I sit on the board of my family's grant making foundation, and emphasis on the family. So the only reason I'm on that board is because I was born into a family where my grandfather, who established the foundation, came from nothing and became successful in business and wanted to give it all back. And so he invited the future generations of his family to sit on the board. And that's lovely, but it wasn't my money. I didn't feel like it was my place to really have a seat at that table. And there's this huge power imbalance between funders and grantees that I had kind of an issue with. And I thought maybe the best way or a nice way for me to feel like I was combating that imposter syndrome was to get involved with nonprofits on the ground myself and really understand how nonprofits work, what are their needs, and try to forge a career where I'm helping them be sustainable in another way, not just kind of sitting in this ivory tower being a grant maker. So I have worked in-house at nonprofits and also am now a consultant with a firm here. And it's just when you get to work with a plethora of nonprofits in all kinds of different situations and fields, you really kind of learn on the ground about what all these amazing causes are and how much people give their lives to help other people.
All right, this thing's on. Okay, there we go. Brian Jones again, and for me, I grew up in North Carolina, like you, and I grew up in a very rural area, and not a lot of people had the opportunity to go to college. Not a lot of people had parents that went to college, grandparents, etc. And so I saw, from a young age, a real gap, and when I wanted to go to college, and resources and support and scholarship opportunities that were there, but I didn't know about them. And so for me, my career has been completely in the nonprofit world. I'm very passionate about education. I currently work with the Evans Scholars Foundation, where we provide full tuition housing scholarships for right now over 1,000 young men and women throughout the country. And I'm just passionate about what I can do and what organizations I can align myself with that can help young people throughout the country who are the same. I've found, like, through my work, that I've seen the kids that grow up on one side of the fence versus the other, in a lot of cases, are just as gifted. It's just opportunity that sets them apart. So I've tried to focus my career on trying to help those that are on the other side of the tracks make it through college, and once they're afforded that opportunity, the world opens up to them.
I got invited to the Vatican a few years ago to attend a conference similar to this. It was actually talking about the imposter syndrome. I'm still I'm still living it. It was a conference co-hosted by Pope Francis, Ban Ki-moon from the United Nations, and Thomas Bach from the IOC. It was a global conference on sport at the service of humanity. So you say, why? I mean, I was inspired. I spent 3 days in the gardens of the Vatican, you know, talking with really influential people who have devoted their lives to making the world a better place. And I was just inspired. I got addicted to it, and I've spent the last few years sort of tracking it and staying involved.
You know, listening to each of you, it goes, you have to look at the heart of the person, I believe. And this is what really and truly inspires and gets people involved and wanting to help others. Because I don't just like to look at the why, I just like to look at the character of a person that makes up that why. And who you are is what led you to what you're doing today. So in what you're doing today, and what I will be doing here recently, what are some of the philosophies that you have as you look forward and look out to, you know, to give opportunities to different, whether it's organizations or in some of the cases up here, universities? Michelle, we'll start with you.
I think for me, coming from a marketing and communications background, I very much approach it as a marketing job. You know, we're not selling widgets, and we're not trying to turn over more widgets, but our role is to connect people to a mission or a cause or a purpose. And so I think that that's something that's been my approach since I've been involved in fundraising professionally, and part of that is because it comes from my personal experience. But I think if you can tell a good story, then you don't have to ask for money. And I know that sounds crazy as a fundraiser, and a part of my career was in major gift fundraising, so really, really big numbers. I don't actually enjoy asking for money. I enjoy telling stories about the organization. I enjoy sharing experiences of our athletes and of our founders and the lives and families that are impacted by that. And if you do a good job of that, people come to you and say, how can I help? And so for me, I think very much I look at it as a communications job and connecting people through storytelling. And I think, you know, today I thought it was really interesting to sit through each of the panels. Every aspect of what was discussed today goes into the fundraising process, having clear, concise, consistent messaging, whether that's your constituency or your volunteers or your board or your staff. Being clear about what those messages are is important. Being able to tell stories of impact are important. Whether it's qualitative, emotional, personal stories, or it's quantitative stories of impact, those things are all really important. And so when I first joined the organization, the first thing I did was take a look at the communications and what were they saying and how were they saying it. And what I realized is that the organization was very, very programmatically driven. Sign up for this, buy this, attend this, join this. But it wasn't doing a good job of saying who they were impacting and why they were impacting. And so that's been a big focus. I've been in this particular role for about 6 months now. And so my primary focus has really been on trying to shift our communications and our mindset towards making sure that we're demonstrating the impact of what we do to the broadest population of people possible.
Jenny?
So I would say my approach or philosophy kind of centers all around sustainability, which I think is a buzzword, you know, multiple panels have talked about today, but from the perspective of a nonprofit consultant, not wanting to talk myself out of the job, but you know, we view our role as coming in to a nonprofit organization, helping them with some aspect or holistically with multiple aspects of their work, their strategy, their planning, their staffing, whatever it is, and then, you know, hopefully getting out, setting them up to be sustainable in their fundraising practices. And I think really there's multiple strategies for doing that, and hopefully we'll get into that, whether that's kind of diversifying your fundraising, investing in staff, being focused on what your donors are passionate about and donor retention. But I think really our approach and my approach has always been, how can we make this nonprofit and its fundraising sustainable across the board, across the organization?
So my focus the last several years has been on the major gift side. So putting systems together around major gift fundraising and face-to-face fundraising, looking at major gifts in the 6, 7, 8-figure range. And I think one of the most important things that I've learned through the last few years has been transparency. And what I mean by that is, when you're asking a donor for a significant gift, you're asking them to trust you. And to build that trust, one of the most important things that I think you can do is be transparent about where the money's going, how much it costs for X, how much it costs for Y, how much it costs for Z. So I always am very conscious about when I build out a proposal for a single donor about, okay, I'm gonna ask this person for $100,000, why am I doing that? What is that, just because it's a round number or because it ties to a specific need? So I think it's always been my philosophy. If I can't explain it to myself, then how am I going to explain it to the donor? So transparency to me is big. You know, I've been in organizations where we raise money, we have scholarship levels at the highest end, and we put the exact amount of what it costs instead of saying $25,000, $26,322, and that shows to the donor this is the exact cost. We're being as efficient as possible as an organization with your funds.
Yeah, with regard to the college space, and we tend to break a lot of the rules that, you know, we've sort of all agreed on today, that your message has to be concise, clear, and consistent. You know, in the college space, we've done some good work with the Big East Conference, which is comprised of faith-based institutions. So if you're talking with Georgetown University, Villanova, you can start with stories about Pope Francis. But if you're talking with a conference of secular schools, you know, then really the story starts more along the lines of the IOC and amateur athletics. So I think the point is we've got a few different stories, particularly in the college space, and I've got to try to sort of pick and choose from that portfolio what is the story I'm telling that particular stakeholder.
Trent.
I like to echo everything that they said.
Okay.
Well, I could simply say ditto, but I like to. I've been in fundraising for 20 years now, and I've sort of bumped into it, and I really enjoy what I do. And in preparing for this, I tried to flush out in my mind how have I done this for 20 years, and a lot of what you've said is true. You try to build a trusting relationship with the donor. And I say that my philosophy, my strategy, my style of fundraising is as simple as, if you see me before I see you, I don't want you ducking behind a pillar or, you know, oh God, there's Trent, he's gonna ask me for something. Is he done? And then you come out. Well, I've done it all wrong. I have really worked hard at, if you see me before I see you, I want you going, hey Trent, come over here and talk to me about what's you know, in general, what's going on. And I'm kind of telling you my secret, because I might have to get rid of all of you. I'm telling you my secret. But if that's happening, then I got you. Because I'm going to take the time to develop the relationship with you and the trust to where I can honestly say, I don't think I've ever asked anybody for anything. I think I have simply presented them an opportunity to get involved with something that they told me they had an interest in. And my gosh, we have that opportunity at the University of Illinois that you told me you were interested in, and I'm simply presenting that to you as an opportunity to get involved.
Great answer from each of you, and this takes me to this next question. So you have your philosophies, you've put together this way of asking without asking. What are some of the pitfalls for those that are new to this, like myself? What are some of the pitfalls? How do you deal with them? And if you can't get that specific ask, or you don't see you get what's the plan B? We'll start with Jenny.
There are so many pitfalls. I feel like I am in the business of pitfalls and helping clients navigate those. So I think, there are a few, I kind of touched on them earlier, but I can go a little more in depth. So diversification, lack thereof in your fundraising strategy is a huge pitfall that we see with our clients. And by that I mean you're siloing your fundraising efforts into one or two or a couple buckets. So whether that's you're putting all your efforts into fundraising through events, which are not necessarily the most efficient way to fundraise. They're a time suck and take a lot of resources and have a lower return on investment. Or whether that you're really prioritizing fundraising from foundations. And I've seen clients where they get the bulk of their funding from one foundation, or at least so much of their funding that they're kind of relying on that one funder, and that's not a sustainable model. And as a funder, wearing my other hat, I know that funders look for who is funding you when they review your grant application. So if you can only list one or two key sources of funding, that's going to be a red flag for a funder. And if the funder is your only, or one of your only supporters, they're going to start getting worried and not want to kind of have that pressure of being your only main source of funding. So I would say diversification across platforms, which is, online fundraising, major gift fundraising, estate planning, like I said, events, annual giving. All of these things are important to build into your portfolio, tailored to your own constituents and your own organization, because some of those things are more, relevant than others for you. I'll let anyone else want to jump in.
Yeah, I would say, when I know this because I've unfortunately been involved in this, and that's spending someone else's money. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times you get an idea in your head, this person's wealthy, I know they're wealthy, I've read the articles, I know their salary, I know their properties, etc. And you think just by asking them to support and meeting with them that a large gift's gonna fall out of the sky. And that can happen, but more times than not, it doesn't. And I think the important lesson that I've learned is pre-soliciting. What I mean by that is asking before you ask. And I try to line up anybody that I think has the ability to make a large gift to our organization. I try to set the parameters of what we have going on currently. So right now we're in a campaign. So I set up, here's a campaign, here's what we have going on. We're looking for leadership gifts at X level to support X, Y, and Z. Is this something that you think you might be interested in? I'd love to follow up with you. And I think you learn so much by how someone reacts to that. Because they can stop you, well, I'm not there yet. And then you respectfully can back off, or they can say, sure, send me more information. I think that can be lost sometimes just because you think someone has a lot of money. If you don't set the parameters to how they can help you, then chances are you're not going to get what you want.
Anyone else?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
One quick comment, it's sales. I mean, you're gonna have to call a whole lot of people to get some interested, and then you're gonna talk to all those interested parties to get somebody to come off their money. That's it, it's just sales.
I would say one of the biggest pitfalls is ourselves. You really need to learn how to shut the hell up. Really, truly, and listen. It is the biggest challenge for fundraisers is that belief, if I just express my passion, they're gonna wanna fund me. And that is very typical of sort of young organizations and founder-driven organizations, because they've drunk the Kool-Aid. And everybody believes in what you're doing. And for an organization to live past that critical kind of first era is being able to make that shift to, yes, of course you want to be passionate. I've worked for a couple different organizations. I happen to personally connect. I'm a triathlete myself. We support athletes with disabilities in swimming and biking and running, by the way, the 3 elements of triathlon. And so I can talk about that passionately, but I also have to shut up and listen. It is exactly what Trent said, and is listening to what people care about and helping connect them in that. There's a lot of different things I can say about my organization, and I try and do that with some consistent messaging, but ultimately it's about what the donor wants to do. It is about their legacy, it is about their impact. And that's a critical, you know, when I started and I was talking about messaging, there was a lot of, look at us, aren't we great? And just shifting that message to, look at what you made possible. And just that shift in language has a lot to do with shutting up, listening, and letting the donor tell you what's important to them. I think that's a big pitfall for many of us.
Yeah, just to emphasize that exact point, we see so often clients that have really worked really hard to nail down that elevator pitch, and they kind of just blurt it out when they're meeting with folks, and that's great that you've crafted that message and that you're on point, but we always say exactly what Michelle just said, which is you need to listen first to your prospect or your donor and ask why did they come to your organization or your event, or what are they interested in supporting, and then tailor your messaging to that rather than coming out of the gates with your little speech. I think, you know, is how you build that trust in those relationships, and ultimately, you know, get a long-term supporter, not just a one-time donor at your event. Or
and again, ditto. And just to add one little more piece to that is that since July of 2015, I have stopped having meetings with prospects and potential donors where I'm going to ask them for something. Well, before I get there, and one key thing is, do not spring and ask on a donor. You should let them know that I'd like to meet with you because I'm planning to ask you for support. Do not invite a donor to have coffee, lunch, dinner, without telling them you're going to ask them for something and then ask them for something. Do not do that. But since July of 2015, I have stopped having meetings with donors over lunch and dinner when I'm planning to ask for something. Because in these 20 years I've been doing this, every time I'm just about to get to the ask, would you guys like more coffee, or would you like a dessert? So when I'm going to ask someone for something, and I've tried to change in my mindset, and I've been talking to folks at the foundation about this, changing in our mindsets that we are not fundraisers. We are philanthropy experts. When you go visit with your doctor, you're not having lunch all up in the doctor's office and eating stuff and snacks. When you go meet with your attorney about your legal problems, believe me, you don't want to have lunch with them because they're billing you what? Hourly. You want to get going quick. And as a philanthropy professional, I want them to see me as a person who's here to help them spend a little bit of their residual blessings that they have on my organization. So I've gotten away from having lunches and dinners because they only get in the way. I'd rather meet with you in your living room or in your corner office or someplace where we can have a quiet setting and that the tone is set, that I'm here to ask you for your philanthropic support.
Well, one of the great things I'm going to say, I have to call my mother when I get back in the car. And the reason why, my mother used to always tell me and my brothers as kids, she was like, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Shut up and listen sometimes. So thank you, because I think that's a very valuable lesson, because the little bit that I've known in this arena, and the same from coaching, when I coached for 8 years, we want to tell everyone about what it is and how good our organization is, how good our school is, instead of sitting back and gauging their interests and what do they want and where do they see themselves and see their efforts and what they're doing. And I think those are great advice, especially for those that are starting out like myself. So earlier, Jenny mentioned the diversifying of your portfolios. I'd like to get into a little bit of that, but also to talk about how you diversify your portfolio, but you're also looking at your resources and how those two will play off of each other. And we'll start with Brian this time.
Sure. So I think in my current role with Devon Scholars Foundation, we really have 3 buckets of money that are equally important. One's our grassroots efforts. That's our $250 donor to $2,500. Then we have a segment that's $2,500 to $50,000 and $50,000 above, which we consider our major gifts. Each is equally important, and I mention each one because we view it as a pipeline. There would be a portion of the population that's going to move along into each bucket from a basic, what we call a basic par club donor in our organization, into a major gift category, and then some that are going to continue to move higher. If you're not constantly creating a pipeline, then you're going to run into a situation where once you've asked the 5 obvious people it is to ask in your organization, and then you're out of people, and you're going to have a gap. So it's so important to continually develop leadership at each level. So it's, everybody thinks about I'm sure you all have a board that you work with, a board of governors, trustees. That's extremely important to your fundraising. Almost equally important, I would argue, would be your junior board. What are you doing for the 20 to 30 to 40-year-olds? How are you lining up the next generation of leaders in your organization? So I think they're all equally important. They all play into each other, and in some cases you'll be surprised what some of your young leaders can do financially, what they can do within their networks. They can be overlooked sometimes when it comes to leadership. So that's what I would say.
What we're finding is sort of a combination of the transparency that Ryan mentioned and the shut up and listen that Trent mentioned. What's happening with us is people are sort of imagining what new programming could be invented and delivered in the marketplace, given sort of the triumvirate of logos that we've got. And so we're transparent with them and say, yeah, we'd love to deliver that programming. We have no endowment. If you're willing to fund it, we'll staff up and get it done.
Okay. And this is a question, well, not necessarily a question, because I know we all have different, we're in different spaces. We have university people here, we have non-for-profit. Can we talk a little bit about the difference between the two and fundraising for the two? And I won't say where some of the difficulties, but where the differences are. Just in case if there's anyone in the audience that's trying to decide which way they want to go.
Yeah, I think I've had the unique experience to have fundraised almost at the entire the continuum of fundraising. I started out at a Boys and Girls Club in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, if I'm meeting with you as a Boys and Girls Club rep, as a philanthropic expert, I need the money like last month. So none of you are getting out of this room today without giving me something, because that money is needed to run that club. Now at the University of Wisconsin, you can give today, you can give next month, you can give upon your demise, whenever it's good for you. Yeah. At Wayland Academy, I was someplace in between both of those areas. I didn't need it last month, but I couldn't wait till you die either. So you have to figure out where you are in your fundraising continuum, because that's going to come across in your message. You don't want to be too forceful, and you don't want to be too relaxed either. So in developing your message, figure out when you're going to meet with a donor, where are they? Are they at the period in their lives where they have kids in college, where they might not be able to give you a major gift now? Or are you going to talk to them about an annual fund gift? And when I say annual fund gift, just because it has the word annual in it, don't mean that it's a one-time gift. I would say if you're getting someone to give you $1,000 in 2019, stretch it a little bit. Say, can we sign you up to commit that the next 2020 and 2021?
I think there's kind of two things at play, and there's that question of diversification and also who your constituency is. So transactional gifts, those folks, the $250 gifts, they're coming in and they're coming out. Those are people that might come to an event, give one time, and you may not see them again. So you have to be constantly cultivating those kind of relationships, giving opportunities for those people to give. At the same time, you know, hopefully some of those people are moving up the scale, and that's happening at every level. Hopefully at the higher level, they're moving in more than they're moving out. But I think that goes to one of the things that Jenny mentioned, which is that idea of diversification. The organization that I joined is Dare to Try is a young organization. It's only been around for about 8 years. As I mentioned, it was kind of very, you know, passion, founder driven, and to that end, they had a principal donor who made a 3-year commitment to the organization that represented over 50% of their revenue. Wonderful, great. $500,000 a year is a really wonderful thing. The problem is that that money isn't necessarily in perpetuity. It allowed the organization to establish proof of concept, but it also created, it was, when I interviewed for them, I said, this is your greatest liability, is this single donor. And I meant that, because if that person leaves, 50% of your revenue is now gone. And so it is important to also have, you know, more than one major donor. I would rather have 5 guys giving 100 than one person giving 500 any day of the week. You know, I'd like 5 guys giving 500, but we're not at that level yet. We're $1 million organization. So part of my role has been to look at the revenue mix and try and make sure that it's sustainable across all the different platforms. Right now, for Dare to Try, individual donors represent over 50%. Corporations only represent 25%, and grants are another, you know, kind of 12, and then we've got things like in-kind and stuff like that. We're way too heavily dependent on individual donors, and that's everything from the transactional 250 donor to the $500,000 donor. So trying to reduce dependence on single donors, but also amplify sponsorship and corporate involvement as well as grants. So part of that is, you know, is someone here short term? Are they here long term? A major gift can take a couple years to cultivate. And so while you're developing that pipeline, what are you going to do to make sure the doors stay open? And so you have to make sure that that mix is not just about X percentage across each source of funding, but that those sources of funding are allow you to support your organization both in the near and the long term.
Yeah, the one quick thing I was going to say is I think the big difference, I spent the majority of my career on the higher ed side, and it's constituencies. You have a built-in constituency at a university. So all of you that were cheering when Deon came up, and I doubt you're going to give Trent any money from Wisconsin. I hate to break it to you, I doubt it. Could be wrong. So at a university, you already have a built-in constituency that cares deeply, not everyone, but more than likely, about what you have going on. At Boys and Girls Club or United Way, you don't have that, right? But the good thing is everyone is your target market. So you have to create a program, you have to create a strategy that leverages what makes you different, what makes you unique than other organizations, and create programs and opportunities out of that and leverage out of it. For us, it's golf. We're in the game of golf. We have a PGA tournament event next week, and we're able to leverage some of the great private courses throughout the country as carrots to get access to certain donors. And so whatever that is for your organization, I think that's what really is really the big difference between working for a university and not.
Yeah.
Well, I have this next question, and it was something that Ryan and Jenny touched on earlier, the importance of a board. You know, putting together a board, how do you form a board? You know, so for those that, you know, are in that space right now, maybe we can help them out on the importance and the necessity and their roles as well.
My number one thing with boards, before we dive deeper, is that you need to establish from the get-go a culture of philanthropy across your whole organization. And by that, I mean your program staff should be thinking about philanthropy and fundraising and relationship building. They shouldn't just look at, oh, that's the development department. But especially with your board as well, we know that board members can be recruited because of their expertise, say in the law or finance or their connections or their talent, and a lot of reasons. But I think no matter who you are or how you come to a board, you need to be giving to your organization. And the way that we work with clients to make sure that culture of philanthropy exists and thrives within a board is by setting those expectations up front. And if you're someone that maybe does bring other things to the table, but you're not willing to give yourself in some meaningful capacity, you don't have to be a major donor if you don't have the means, and also reaching out to your networks and bringing them in and helping participate with asks and all of this, then truly at the end of the day, that's not someone that you want on your board. And the way we do that is we craft job descriptions so that your board member knows exactly what they're signing up for before they get on board. And that's not just for the fundraising expectations, which is part of it, but it's for, you know, the time commitment and all of this. And that's just to make sure you're not just getting some name in the door or adding another name on your list, but that you're getting committed long-term board members who are really gonna sort of walk the talk for your organization. And again, as a funder, we look at one stat that is very important, and that is 100% board giving. If you can't report to me as a grant maker that every single member of your board of directors gives directly a gift to you each year, then you're eliminated from consideration. And a lot of funders do that. And even if you can only give a small amount, you've got to be giving something, or else why are you there sitting at that table? So that's kind of my biggest thing with boards and the culture of philanthropy.
I think also with boards, and this is something we're going through right now, I've done before this role, did a lot of work with board training and organizational management, is that you need to have skin in the game. And how can you possibly ask someone to engage with your organization if you're not engaged yourself? So I echo what Jenny said. I think another part of that is that helping boards understand that their job isn't necessarily, I'm going to shift a little bit, it isn't necessarily fundraising, it's development or philanthropy. And by that I mean you don't have to be the closer. I'm the closer. That's what you pay me to do. But you need to be a connector, or you need to have some institutional wisdom and knowledge that adds value to the organization. And all of those are development aspects. So whether it's, you don't have to do the ask, but make the introduction, or sit down with me when we're getting ready to plan the gala and be strategic about who you're inviting to your table. We have some high value board members, but 3 of them live on the same street in the same town. When it comes time for the gala, and we only have 8 board members, when it comes time for the gala, we've kind of exhausted who we're going to invite. So part of being thoughtful about your board is not just about their capacity, but it's about their sphere of influence. Aside from the Venn diagram of skills they bring and industries you represent and things like that, but that sphere of influence is certainly economic, but it's also, are you going to be doing a capital campaign? Is your intention to raise funds to build a building to conduct your services? You might want someone in corporate real estate. So you want to fit those things, but make sure they don't all live in the same neighborhood, because when it comes time to the actual fundraising process, they're not going to be able to bring people to the table. They're not going to be able to bring enough people to the table that makes fundraising a sustainable practice for that board.
Okay.
Let me say something provocative. I just learned recently a board should be expected to contribute about 1/3 of your donations. And I think depending on the spectrum that you're on, the size of your organization, maybe or maybe not, that's realistic. But if the 3 things that a board member can contribute is time, treasure, and talent, what I'm challenging is this notion that every board member should be putting in cash. Because if it's an active board and I'm putting in my time and talent, and maybe I'm doing it because I don't have any cash. And on the other hand, if I'm putting in big chunks of cash, sometimes I just need to be left alone. I'd rather just give money, keep the fuel going, but I can't get dragged into the weeds. So it's kind of is this an industry standard that the board member is always expected to donate cash? If that is the standard, I'm challenging it. I think it's not fair if that same board member is spending hours and hours and hours and making all the right connections and helping the organization in another way.
I just add one more thing, that when it comes to the board giving, I challenge you to think about this, that not only board giving, but staff giving. And it's not about the amount. It's about the participation rate. In every organization that I have been with, even at the Boys and Girls Club, we encourage every staff person to give, even if it's a quarter, because we're not reporting how much individuals have given, but we're reporting the participation rate. Board members love that, grant makers love it, your other funders and supporters love it, when you can say, we have 100% staff giving back to the organization.
I'm one of the volunteer co-chairs for my class for Middlebury, and have been since I graduated for fundraising. And it is so much easier to ask someone for money when you can say, I've already given my gift this year, will you join me in supporting the organization this year? So it's not always about how much. I mean, at some level, you need to be able to count on a certain amount of revenue for your organization, and some of that comes from the board. But it's being able to insert yourself and ask someone to join you, as opposed to ask them to do something you're not willing to do yourself.
Yeah, exactly. That's the logic behind it. It's how can you a board member function is to be able to go out into the community and represent your organization, and ask for money and support and people's time, and you need to be able to kind of put your money where your mouth is. Again, even if it's literally, we, as a funder, we don't get reports on how much, and I've never seen that metric of like a third is expected from board giving. We don't track that metric. We just track, has everyone made some kind of meaningful gift for them, which could be a quarter, exactly. And I also think there's the concept of give get, which is a policy that a lot of organizations successfully implement, which is, again, if you're not able to give yourself more than really small contribution, then you can also go out into your networks and fundraise through that way. So it kind of evens the playing field because obviously some of our board members just have a lot more means than others. So we never strive to be exclusive. We want to be inclusive, but just to have some participation in a meaningful way from each of your board members is huge.
I would also say that not every high value volunteer needs to be on your board. You can have committee involvement, you can have leadership in programming.
Advisory
They can have
board.
advisory boards. There's a lot of ways for people to be actively engaged in your organization without being a board member. So I think a lot of times people think, oh, come join my board, come join our board. I've worked for an organization that did a large amount of their fundraising by getting more board. There were 38 board members. That's a lot of board members. And they were each given $5 grand. That's a big part of the budget. That's not the way to fundraise. And so I think you have to be thoughtful about, what is the need, why are you asking them to join the board? If it's because you want to secure their engagement, they should be engaged whether or not they're a board member. Asking them to be on a board is asking them to take on some additional responsibility that they should be prepared to take on.
Thank you all. I think there was a lot of very interesting point of views, and we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to open it up for some Q&A. If anyone has any questions for any of the panelists, we will take them now.
Hi everybody, my name is Lindsay McLean-Opio and I work for Generations for Peace, which is an international peace-building nonprofit with roots in the sports movement. But we've just opened our first ever US office. So I'm tasked with kind of fundraising in this new market here, and also developing out a unique US-centric board. So I had two questions. One, what are some of your favorite strategies for engaging board members in fundraising and development, aside from having them contribute something or do this give or get approach? And then my second question is, how do you change the culture of an organization that isn't having staff or board members give? So when you're kind of handed something where that's not the norm, how can you generate buy-in so that you get that 100% give rate from your staff and board members? Thank you.
Since I brought up the having staff give, I will address that question. So I started that when I was at the Boys and Girls Club, where a membership is $5, and most of the people that were working for us were people from the community. And one of the main things I did was I gave. And then I would match whatever someone else gave that was a staff member. and I really started to stress to them that in order for it helps me do my job easier if I can go into the community and tell people I'm meeting with that even though my staff has challenges, a lot of them have financial challenges, but they believe in what we're doing, trying to help develop young adults, and that I think staff really appreciated that they saw that their way of helping to raise money was by giving. And again, I stress it wasn't about an amount, because we never list their names and the amounts that they gave, but we really talked about participation rate. And in that first year, we were at about 92% giving. And the buzz was going on, who's not giving? Who isn't giving? Why do we have 100%? Well, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're not here to list names. But every year after that, and even to this very day, every staff member gives. And it trickled down to the kids giving back.
Well, one thing I'll say for your first question is just something as simple as we love to do note writing parties with our clients, with their boards, and that's just getting together, whether there's an event coming up and it's the invitation to the event, or it's your annual appeal letter that you send out around the holidays, or whether it's a thank you note on the back end for someone volunteering or donating. It's actually getting your board in a room, getting little stationery made and pens, and just having everybody write personal notes to mail out. That's a great way to engage, order pizza or something. Engage everyone in something that's positive and builds relationships with your constituents, but isn't just about, raising money. It is, but it's a feel-good activity, and people, it really means a lot to them to get a handwritten note from a board member.
I've been working with our board chair and our executive director on creating a new board commitment form, and so part of that is setting expectation when you're joining the organization. But I felt very strongly that it needed to be more than this many dollars. And so it sort of says, I think an effective board is actively engaged in the work of the organization. And so if you're working for any university, I went to Wisconsin, I went to Illinois, I went to, the fact that you personify the institution is a really helpful way to fundraise. For organizations where that constituency isn't necessarily connected in the same way that you are, getting your board to be involved. So for us, our board commitment form, aside from the dollar, and we have a give-get, but it's also, I will support development efforts, and they choose, but it's a way to help, also it's a way to educate your board without educating your board. I'll help write letters, I'll connect the director, I'll sit with the director of development and talk about sponsorship opportunities or, those kinds of things. So identifying ways for them to be involved in supporting the organization. We've also included, we have practices almost every night of the week. We're asking our board members to come to one practice. And we're asking our board members, we do 5 camps, we're asking them to come to 1 day of camp. So they can pick whatever one they do, but in order for them to talk effectively to our community about what we do, they need to be a part of what they do. And not just it's important to be a witness to it, but also to be a participant in it. So we've built those things into our board commitment form. It's not you must do it on this date or this people, but it's come to a practice, come to a camp, come to our, we encourage you to participate in our fundraising events, all of those things, setting the expectation that your responsibility to the organization isn't solely money, it's also engagement and understanding.
And I would just say it's never too late. I sympathize completely that your organization has been handed a situation, a set of expectations or lack thereof. We experience that all the time with our clients. You can still change the narrative, change the expectations, do a board commitment form, a board job description, get a board committee that's committed to creating those documents so that they have ownership. And it's never too late to kind of change that culture of philanthropy. And we see it all the time. Sometimes you're going to lose some board members, and that's okay. You want new people in the room if some of those people aren't the right fit, and you want to make sure you have that culture of philanthropy.
Okay. We have another question.
Sure. So my name is Ryan Johnson. I came in from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm representing my own company called Nexus Entertainment and Sports. And so our focus is we're creating a program that's basically going to close the socioeconomic gap within the gaming and esports industry, while at the same time creating more interest for minorities to study STEM-related fields when they go to college. So one of the challenges that we're running into is that when we're talking about a creative and emerging industry like esports or gaming, what I found is that a lot of traditional sports leadership, and then even on the philanthropy side, sometimes the value is not seen from, what is this new industry actually doing to millennials and Generation Z. So we're in the process now, we have our partners in place, we have facilities in place, but what we're struggling is actually bringing on funding and different grant opportunities, because there aren't a lot of grants that exist currently for the gaming and esports space. So my question is, it could be a little bit vague and ambiguous, but as time continues to progress, when you're talking about funding different programs, what do you think the likelihood is, or what would you recommend to people in your position that do development or that write different funds or grants to provide opportunities like this? Because I'm not sure if many people know, but there's 70 plus universities currently in the nation that give full ride scholarships for kids to come be a part of their varsity esports programs. So if 80% of minorities are playing games on a weekly and daily basis, it's like, instead of reinventing the wheel, why not bring this education to them? And then instead of the opposite of the consumer standpoint, we can teach them some of the STEM skills around computer science, data analytics, coding, graphic design, etc. But it's very difficult when the programs aren't in place to fund said type programs. So I don't know if that's more of a statement or a question, but it's just something that we're running into as we're trying to actually execute on this program that we have created.
Thank you. Emerging markets, there you go.
I'll take a crack at it. I don't think you're going to get your money from grants. It's a new and exciting emerging industry, as you said, but that's not that industry. The money is coming from sports teams, owners, media, sponsors. So that's to me, that's your prospect list, not foundations and grants.
I just jump in here real fast. I somewhat disagree, because I believe if you go after
and universities, by the way, I'm
no,
sorry, Lisa.
No, if you go after STEM grants, people who care about just education and whichever vehicle it is. So if it's the vehicle of esports that gets the kids interested in learning, that's what they're looking for. So you could take that grant and make sure that you're meeting their objective. If it's to teach STEM, and you happen to do it through your vehicle. So don't look for esports grants, look for STEM grants, and then flip it around.
In response to that, so one thing I'm going to say that when people hear esports, that's about 1% of the video gaming industry. So the gaming industry collectively is about $141 billion annually, and esports is about $1 billion of 141. So to your point, I probably never thought about that, but that could be the simple answer, is just targeting STEM-related programs versus gaming specific.
Yeah, you're spot on in your comment. In our organization, we give scholarships to caddies. So the first thing that someone unfamiliar with us thinks about is rich white males, right? That's who plays golf. That's who caddies are. And we've really repositioned our message over the last decade or so that we are an education organization that happens to be in the space of golf. And we give scholarships to low-income individuals. So I would encourage you to focus on really targeting your message to education, who, by the way, this is their opportunity and this is how they're going to get from A to Z. And it all goes back to storytelling. And I would encourage you to find, seek out some of those individuals who are on college scholarship. Get their story. Start to use those type of stories to get your messaging out, because that's how I think you can maybe break down some of the barriers with what some of your objections are. And another point that was brought up is, look to who is sponsoring. I mean, the esports industry is nuts right now with the sponsorships, and I would just look at the sponsor list on whenever it's on TV, whenever there's events. I mean, those are great targets that can, because all these organizations that have made major investments to be in a certain space, and in our world, we work with organizations that are putting major funding behind the PGA, the USGA, the First Tee, and it makes sense because we're all in the same family, and I think you can have the same success if you look for the same type of organizations that are investing in that type of space now.
Okay, thank you.
Ready to go? Well, there you go.
So I want to thank the last panel. Hard job to keep everybody here, keeping them away from the early morning. I think Michelle has materials about Dare to Try she's going to tell us about.
And just, if anyone wants it, you don't have to take it, but we just finished a new piece of communication. I was talking about shifting our communication. So if people are interested, I do have copies of a new brochure we did. And it's what we've been talking about, kind of clear messaging. And so those messages that are there, it's who we are, what we do, and why it's important. It's pretty much an elevator speech, but it's a universal set of messages that our board members will be using with our larger funders. It incorporates both qualitative and quantitative data, as well as stories from our athletes. I think it's pretty good. So if people are interested in kind of looking at sort of marketing from that perspective, I'm more than happy to share it with you. They smell kind of funny, so that might keep you awake for the afternoon because the ink's still drying. But they're out there on the table if anybody would like one.
So before we let this panel go, we're going to keep them up here for a minute. But I want to open up questions now, really from the whole day. I know you've heard a lot of different information. We've had a lot of fantastic speakers and panels. If people have questions that they want to direct at specific individuals, Kayla's got a microphone, so just raise your hand, and then we'll get that directed to the appropriate individuals.
Just go
Just
slow.
360.
What?
Planning
360?
big restructure and update right now. Is there like an ideal number out there that says, eight's the best number for a board? I mean, I heard, 36, which is obviously way too big. I kept the board really small until we were ready to, scale up, and now I'm going to be recruiting the people that I'm after. But what is there a number?
I would say it depends on your organization for sure, but there is a sweet spot. I think the legal minimum is 3. So more than 3.
Less than 38.
Yes, but much less.
Perfect, that's all I need.
Much less than 38. So yeah, I mean, it really depends, and what we see a lot of times with our clients is putting into the bylaws a range of board members, so that you don't want to, hamstring yourself if you find this great new board member. You only have set up that you can have 9 board members. So I would say, kind of figure out a range that you feel like works for your group, whether that's 8 to 10, 5 to 9, something like that. And I'm curious to hear how big other folks' boards is, and I bet it's a lot different in a university setting. But you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. So I would say once you're getting towards 20, that's a lot, and that not to put a rule on it, but that's I would generally, for most organizations, fewer than 20 is what works.
We're currently an 8-member board, and the board has recently voted to increase the number of board members in the next 3 years. So we're adding 3 this year, and probably another 2 or 3. So we'll go up to a maximum of 15, probably more like 13. And that's part of scaling up the organization. So last year the organization was a $600,000 organization. This year it's a $1 million organization. And so recognizing as we're moving beyond kind of that initial growth stage that we need to extend our sphere of influence and our reach, and so we are being very intentional about building that board and who those board members are going to be that allow us to do that. So some of that isn't connected to an increase in revenue, but it's also connected to an increase in our network. And along with that growth, our plan is to grow from, right now we're serving about 350 athletes annually, and we have a goal to be reaching 1,200 athletes by 2021. So those things are all aligned. It's not about a random number of board members. It's based on some analysis of the size of the organization, the revenue that we want to generate, and the number of constituencies that we want to serve. And so we've kind of reached a number that seems like the right number to support that growth. So it really is organizationally dependent, but this organization was very thoughtful about what that increase would look like over the next 2 to 3 years.
Any other questions?
In my experience, I've found that 15 to 25 in that number works, and if you can try to keep it at a odd number in case you have things to vote on, that you won't have a stalemate.
Okay. Anybody else? We're at the back here, Kayla.
most successful fundraising events you've seen and why? And were any of those events, did they require like very little event planning and expenses to go into it?
I think your question should have been, what is the most challenging events you've ever had? Why are they so challenging? Because most events that I've been involved with have presented, lots of challenges, even though you've raised some money, but you're pulling your hair out getting there. So I'll leave it to the rest of the panel.
I think one of the questions is to be careful about dependence on events. For our revenue, about 20% of our revenue right now comes from events. And I'm pretty comfortable with that number. I'd like that number to grow, but I'd like it to grow as representative of our overall growth. I don't like to be dependent on any single stream of revenue. My bigger goal right now is not so much how much the event raises, but how much it costs us to run the event. And I'm inheriting an event, I'm new to the organization. Last year they spent 35 cents on the dollar for that event. That's not totally atypical. The industry range is kind of 10 to 35. I don't want to be at the top of that range. So for us to make $200,000, we spent 70. That's a crazy, that's $70,000 we gave away. So it's, I think, what is a successful event? To me, a successful event is one that generates revenue for the organization without costing you too much in actual dollar cost, but also burning people out. If I'm spending money, if I'm spending my time working on an event or a gala, I'm not spending that time building relationships with major donors. And so a single major donor, we recently secured a commitment for $300,000. That is significantly more worth my time than a gala that's gonna burn me for the next 3 months that's gonna raise half that. So, so a successful event is not, a bowling party or a this or that. To me, a successful event is one that where the return on investment is an appropriate number.
Yeah, so my firm does a lot of event planning, and I completely agree. Again, not to talk us out of a job, but events are definitely, I would say, the least efficient way to fundraise, just because, your question was, I think, partly, is there a more simple way to do events? And the answer is usually no. It just takes a lot of effort to organize an event. But to answer both of your questions, what I will say is exactly what Michelle is saying. It's costing her time to build relationships. So one form of event that you might consider that is more low maintenance but heavy on the relationship building is what we would call a parlor meeting. And that's when you're really taking kind of your either your major donors or one of your board members' closest friends and potential prospects and inviting them into that board member's home for a very intimate evening. And your board member can just throw out some charcuterie and wine and keep it very simple, and they can even take that on themselves if they're willing to, and just sort of invite people into the home to have a really direct conversation about the organization, and no surprises, like Trent says, but and that's a fairly low maintenance, high return on investment way to do it, because it's not a whole production, and you're actually getting those folks in a room where you can talk to them and tell them all about the good work that you do. And as far as kind of the most meaningful, or one of the most meaningful things I've seen in an event that made an impression is, we've had clients that do a participatory activity at even a big fancy gala, where they have a set of questions. So one of our clients raises money for cancer, and they start and say, has anyone in this room, is anyone a cancer survivor? And to some extent we have some people around the room that we've put at different tables so that they can get to talk to people, but their table didn't know that that person was at their table, and that person stands up. And then all around the room there are other people who are survivors, and you say, oh wow, they're right in front of me. And then on down the line, kind of, do you know someone have you been a caretaker for someone who's gone through cancer? Have you known someone who has battled cancer? And then at the end, every single person is standing up. And we all know this, but it's just a visual participatory way where you get every single person on their feet saying, yes, cancer has affected my life, and I'm here to try to change that.
And then you do a paddle race.
So I have a question over here now. Hearing Jenny and Michelle, you talked about the inefficiency with events and the difficulty of raising funds. I'd like to hear all of you talk a little bit about what purposes other events serve, because there's other purposes besides just the pure fundraising that you're going to get to from the event. So I'd like to hear some of your perspectives on that.
In our world, I think it's access. So most of the people that every organization is trying to get to gets invited to 100 of these things a year. They don't need another event. But if you can provide an access or opportunity that is unique, in our world, it's a golfer, hearing from a golfer that you wouldn't hear from anywhere else, or access to a golf course that you don't have access to. Then we get people, it's amazing how people answer our calls when that's what the message is. So I think it's figuring out what your angle is, and then having that unique touch point that they're going to have a different experience than they are anywhere else is really what sets it apart from any other event.
We host events from time to time, and they're not fundraising events. They are networking events. It's an opportunity to, well, we have an unfair advantage because we can bring very influential people from all over the world, and that attracts an audience. So, we've got that advantage. But we bring people to events just to introduce our sort of mission and our vision and our purpose, and then that becomes our network, and then we can follow up with those people separately, individually later.
We call those fundraisers, yeah. So there's fundraisers, but there's a wonderful place for fundraisers as well, where you just are bringing people together.
Okay, Donnell?
Yes, it's Donnell Osley again. This is so cool.
Thank you, Donnell.
So,
Talking about the air conditioning?
Right. My question is quick because I know I have stories I can tell, but I'm so excited. This is the most transparent question that I could come up with. I have a meeting Monday, and I am looking to approach the philanthropic culture within a non-for-profit organization from sports. They just built their own avenue through sports, but I believe I have the leveraging network and experience. I'm to the point now where I'll send you my proposal and you check it, and let's just see if I nail it. But I would love to know, how do I approach this win-win? Because everything that has been done here today, literally from top to bottom, I've had to cover over the last 12 to 13 years to get to this point. So I'm really excited to hear, how do I approach this from just slam? Like, I want to slam. I don't care about the money. I want to come back next year and be like, I did it. So,
What's the purpose of the meeting?
The purpose of the meeting was, I literally just asked the vice president, can we have a meeting to propose a change? I wanted to propose a position change. So that was my approach to bringing the information, and they said yes, they love to hear it because of my performance. So I felt like it was already set up. I just need to go in and slap. And this is just totally prepared me, if that answers your question.
I kind of want to throw it to Trent, because you sort of made a really good point, which is don't surprise anybody in a meeting. You know what I mean? Do they know why you're coming? Because if this is your first meeting, I wouldn't be asking for anything.
Four-page proposal already ready to be sent this weekend. 6 months of explaining sports and why sports are approached negatively from their position. 7 classes asked for me to teach music, esports. I mean, I have the background in all of them, and I'm literally just proposing, you've already asked for what I do. I just would like for you to give me the title, funding, and accessibility to represent you as a company. So meaning me as a brand saying, this is what I can do for you, and here's my leveraging power. So it's within without trying to go out. I'm not trying to go out. I'd like to just stay.
So I'm going to encourage you to talk to them individually after the panel. I think we've got a couple more questions we want to be able to get in. I think that's a good question, Donnell, and I think you've got some people that are obviously going to be around for the evening, getting a chance to do that. Kayla, is there anybody else? I thought Lisa.
She's good.
Huh?
She's not.
Okay.
So you spoke a lot about like how to talk to major gift donors. I was just wondering how that differs to family foundations when you're trying to submit the grant application. Like how would you speak to them differently with that?
I would say it's not necessarily completely different, because on some level you can kind of think of your foundation donor as a major donor. I just think sometimes it's a little easier to figure out a foundation. Sometimes people think like, oh, it's so mysterious, I just want to get on the phone and have this direct conversation with a major donor. That feels more comfortable to people, and of course that's true to an extent, but at the same time most foundations are more clear about what they want to fund up front because they are an institution, they're more formalized. So they have a website or some kind of presence, however you found them. They should, if they're a good foundation, they should have a mission, they should have guidelines, and they should be clear about what they are looking to fund, what their program areas are. And so, that's another case of kind of just listening, not just telling them about your organization, but trying to, with being authentic and genuine about what you do and not bending over backwards to kind of change your model or your cause, but try to tailor what you do to meet, what's in your proposal to meet their specifications. And sometimes my best advice is don't apply if it's just clearly not a fit, because we see, way too many folks that just, spend their time applying everywhere and it's just not a fit for their programmatic guidelines.
And I'll add, I would approach the foundation side similar to an individual donor in that you still, just because they're a foundation, they posted online what they support, you still need to go through the same peer-to-peer leverage channels that you would with an individual. So I mean, we often will share a list of foundations that we think fit our criteria with board members to say, hey, do you know anyone that's a trustee or involved in this organization that can help us? I mean, there's several foundations that don't accept unsolicited. I mean, you have to be granted the ability to even put a proposal forth. So I encourage you just to approach it in that same way that you would with an individual donor, where you might say, hey, does anyone know Bill Gates? Get us in the door. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, whether it's a board member of the foundation or staff is your, I always say kind of your best friend at a foundation. They're your ally, they're your advocate. So it's just like major donors or any donor, if you can build that relationship with the foundation staff member or board member, whoever that key person is, and keep that dialogue going. They might not have a program that's a fit for your organization right now, but maybe later they are doing something that's right in that lane, and they, so I would just maintain that relationship, maintain the dialogue and the communication, and keep letting them know about the good stuff you're doing.
Great. Well, I'm going to keep these guys up here in the comfortable chairs, but I want everybody to give them a hand for a great panel. We're just going to do a quick wrap up here. After we're done, we're going downstairs. We've got a whirly ball court for the next 2 hours. There'll be food and everything downstairs, so we'll show you where that's set up, and hope you stick around and get an opportunity to continue to engage and talk about the things that you've heard and learned today. I think there's some great takeaways from this panel and really from every panel. One of the ones that I wanted to talk about was Farlone's comment about getting more engagement from the groups that have the money, the sports philanthropists, the big organizations, and the professional sports teams. We invited every single professional sports team in the 5 major leagues, 151 teams. We reached out to all of their foundations. We reached out to owners of many of the teams as well. So I think that obviously for next year, our goal will be to have all of the teams represented, but I think the challenge is that they needed to see that there was a demand from the people that are in this room, that there was interest and the passion from the people that are here. And I think that's something that's going to carry a lot of weight, because one of the first questions that I had from people that I did reach out to that have the money to make those grants was, who's going to be in the room? What types of organizations? Is anybody going to show up? It's an unproven event. You've all helped prove that there is a demand for this. You all see the interest and the passion of the people in this room. This panel, all of the other panels we heard today, we had 5 tremendous panels. So I want to thank everybody that came and did that. I've had a lot of people request more opportunity to engage long-term. So with everyone's permission, I'm going to circulate a list of attendees with email addresses. If you do not want your name included on that list with your email address, please email me by the end of Monday of next week, and then I'll make sure that your name's not on that list. Otherwise, I'll distribute a list to everybody next week that will have all of the attendees, their organizations, and their email address. I think, Michelle, one of the comments that you made in the last panel really hit to me, which is that skin in the game concept. Everybody in this room has really put skin in the game by being here and showing up, making sure that we're demonstrating that passion, that we're engaging in this. So the one thing I'll challenge is to shut the hell up, because I'm going to charge everybody with going out there and doing the exact opposite, getting back on social media, engaging with each other, staying in contact with us. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, all the usual places. But there's a lot of conversations that can be had. A lot of the people in this room I first met and first engaged with on social media. And then I had the opportunity to meet them at various conferences or events or things of that nature over the years. So the last thing that I'll say is, before we go downstairs, when I send out that email list, we're also going to have a survey about the Sports Philanthropy World Congress. I'd love everybody to fill that out. Give us your feedback. We're not going to publish any specific comments from any individuals, but we definitely want direct input about what you'd like to see, what types of panels you're interested in, what types of breakout sessions or workshops where you can really dig into it. This was a great panel. I saw there were a lot of questions because you're covering a broad area, and obviously money is the lifeblood of every organization. So whether they raise it through events, through grants, solicitations, there's a lot of different strategies. So next year, June 26, 2020, start planning, talk to people. If you want to be involved in planning the event and being on the committee for next year, just reach out to me and let me know, because it's going to be a lot bigger. We're going to have a lot more involved and more opportunities to participate. So thank you everybody for coming. Come and enjoy downstairs, and thanks again for panel 5.